Where do you go when you die? An Echo Park Story by Terry Lloyd. It was during a La Nina winter in Echo Park that Tyler met his end. We had not yet been pushed out by the gang and pontificating gentrifiers. That would come a year later along with a string of car bombings, the housing bubble, and predatory lending. Kevin was the oldest of three little boys that lived with Tyler at the top of the Little Fargo Street cul-de-sac. Fargo Street is one of the steepest streets in Los Angeles. The steepest part was between Alessandro and North Alvarado Streets facing Silver Lake. It's roughly a 33% grade. Little Fargo on the other side of the hill, facing Elysian Park, is barely a city block long in length and equally as steep. Accessible from Echo Park Avenue, the top of Little Fargo was a green alcove with 100-year-old cypress trees and an overgrowth of ivy and shrubs lining the stairs of a very short walk street that leads up to the end of another cul-de-sac, Preston Avenue. Preston Avenue also has a very short walk street at the end of its cul-de-sac. It leads down to Baxter Street, another well-known steep street in Los Angeles. It's easy to understand how these streets played into early 20th century filmmaking such as Laurel and Hardy, Keystone Cops, and The Little Rascals. All one needed was props and the laughs were built in. Kevin's family had moved in with Dolores, my neighbor, and their grandmother. It was to be a temporary situation, the kind of temporary that goes on for 5 years kind of temporary. Kevin and I had a standing date on Wednesday afternoons, also known as painting day. He would come over after school to draw or paint and talk about all sorts of things from Godzilla to the existential. Kevin was in first grade. It was Dolores' idea to start painting days. Dolores was an educator and social worker working with at-risk youth and families in the community. She saw something sensitive and inquisitive in Kevin that his parents were missing. Dolores felt that my being an artist might make for good mentorship of her grandson. Painting day would be a healthy place to express himself and build his confidence. Before we go further, I have a confession. I am a sucker when it comes to kids and art supplies. This is probably from a lack of parental support for the creative when I was a child. I wasn't allowed to go to art school when it was time to grow up and get an education. I had to do something practical, like nursing. I used to wonder what my life would have been like had my creative side been fully supported and realized sooner. One Wednesday afternoon, I was on a deadline for a client. Being freelance, I often took work where I could find it, and this was a large project with tight deadlines. I had left a note on Dolores' front door explaining that I'd have to cancel or move painting day to the weekend. Around 3:30 p.m., I heard Dolores and Kevin open the gate to their front yard. Glancing out my living room window, I saw Dolores holding my note and Kevin wipe tears. There was no other choice. Work could wait an hour or so. After all, it was painting day. Kevin and I had a special agreement when it came to rainy days as well. If it wasn't raining too hard, we would put on our raincoats and boots and go puddle splashing around the neighborhood. We would count Volkswagens as we walked along Vestal Avenue, or pull on overhanging branches of bougainvillea, all too prominent in the area, making a shower of petals and water drops. We would then walk down Baxter Street, cutting through my backyard and running across the cul-de-sac back home where Dolores had a hot bath waiting for Kevin. Kevin never returned home dry, no matter how hard we tried. Well, we didn't try very hard. We always stomped and splashed big. I mean, wasn't that the point of puddle splashing on raining days? Tyler was a pain in the ass. Typical wiener dog with a Napoleon complex. You know the kind, yappy, arrogant, and endearing. Did I mention yappy? Looking back, it was obvious he had separation anxiety. He hated being alone, often protesting for hours after Dolores went to work. He was also a little Houdini that escaped his yard and ended up across the street at my house frequently. Dolores wasn't too happy with him doing this. It was doggy betrayal. My cats weren't too thrilled either. Kevin and his younger brother attended school in Beverly Hills, where they lived previously. The public school in Echo Park didn't have the best educational track record, which is common in areas with a long history of impoverishment and systemic oppression. Most of the non-Hispanic families moving into Echo Park at the time exported their kids outside of the community or sent them to the local Montessori instead. So every weekday morning, Kevin's dad would drop the boys off, and every weekday afternoon, Kevin's mom would pick them up. On the afternoon in question, just about the time Vicki was supposed to be on her way to Beverly Hills, I got a knock on my front door. She was visibly distraught and in tears. She asked me if I would walk down the hill because she thought she hit Tyler with the car. Would I see if he was dead? Vicki thought Tyler was locked in the house when she left, but he managed to get out and chase the car down the hill, catching up and getting caught by the wheel that snapped his neck. Tyler's end came quick and clean. Oddly, as I looked at Tyler, I felt an innocence about his little brown and black carcass laying there almost sweetly, like he was asleep in the street. How easily he slipped into death. I walked back up Fargo to my house and grabbed a towel to cover Tyler. I told Vicki he was gone and promised to move him before she got back with the kids, and, more importantly, before Dolores came home from work. Our neighbor Steve, a mix between biker and white trash, was kind enough to move Tyler out of the street and over to the curb. He told me he had seen it play out. Animal control officers, understanding my request to get there before Vicki and the boys returned, were there within half an hour and removed Tyler. I was both surprised and grateful. When Vicki got home, she frantically cleaned her mother's small apartment at the back of their property, removing evidence of Tyler and spraying Febreze on the bed linens to remove his scent. At the time, I wondered if this was more about her guilt than it was about her mother's impending grief. Early that evening, when Dolores got home, Vicki brought her over to my house. She didn't have the strength to tell Dolores about the dog. We were standing at my front gate. I explained to her what happened. Gently and directly, I told Dolores that Tyler had run down the street after Vicki and was hit by her car. "Dead?" she asked. I nodded and said quietly, "Yes." She turned to her daughter, who was crying, and said, "Oh, Vicki, it's not your fault." Dolores thanked me, and they walked back across the street to their home. As I watched them, I recalled Dolores once saying to me that Tyler would probably die of his own stupidity. For the next week, there was a palpable sadness at the top of the cul-de-sac. And then it rained, and it was a Wednesday. I walked up the steps to Dolores' house and knocked on the door, wondering if we would paint or stomp. Kevin met me with his rain boots and plastic raincoat on. He was ready to stomp and splash. We walked the steps up to Preston Avenue, and then down the steps to Baxter Street, and up the hill to Lemoyne Street, where we could see the monoliths of downtown LA to one side and the Hollywood Hills on the other. We moved on to the Donaldson Street stairs down to Vestal Avenue. We splashed a little and shook some tree branches along our way. A few dogs behind wood fences barked at us, but mostly Kevin was quiet. "Terry, do we have to die?" he asked. My head exploded. Not literally. It's just something that happens with my consciousness when I'm prompted by something profound and multifaceted. A kaleidoscope of thought and ideas presented itself. Knowing in an instant that I had to respect Dolores' belief system along with Kevin's parents' beliefs, which differed and were often diametrically opposed, I took a deep breath and said, "Yes, we do." And then I asked, "Is this about Tyler?" "Yes. Why did Tyler die?" Thinking fast and remembering to keep our conversation on Kevin's level of understanding, I answered, "Tyler didn't know that the car was bigger than him. He thought he could catch up to Mommy's car and make it stop, but that didn't work, and he got hurt and died." A moment later, "Why do we have to die?" Taking a beat, I thought, how do I explain in the language of a 6 or 7-year-old the cycle of life and what makes it a gift is the fact that it's temporary? How do I explain light and dark, yin and yang, the food chain, war versus peace, politics, religion, and all the bullshit adults do to devalue the invaluable? I don't know for sure, Kevin. I think knowing we will die one day is what makes life special. Does that make sense? Yeah, I think so. We walked on to the next puddle, taking a stomp and taking a splash. He then asked me, where do we go when we die? I don't know for sure. No one I know who has died has ever come back to tell me. But I think we probably go back to where we came from. Where's that, he asked. Probably the place we were before we were born. Do you remember that place? No, do you? Nope. We walked back down to Baxter Street, up Preston Avenue stairs, and down the little Fargo Street steps to his front porch in silence.